And again, that was just some of what we heard from Canada's premiers earlier today ahead of this 30-day pause being announced. How that will affect how things go moving forward, we'll have to see. But I also did earlier today speak to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, and while we were working under the assumption that the tariffs would be coming through at midnight, he says this is an opportunity for Canada to look at how it can make trade more diversified in this country. Take a listen. Premier, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you as well, Michael.
Listen, I need to start here with Mexico because, as you know, that country's president began this day announcing that the tariff threats from Trump vis-a-vis our country have essentially been paused for a month. And you say that opens up another path for Canada. What do you mean by that?
Well, I would hope whatever discussions the president of Mexico has had with President Trump, that our Prime Minister in Canada would be having something in a very similar vein. Listen, these tariffs, counter tariffs, this whole escalation of imposing these tariffs and counter tariffs on Canadians and Americans is not good for our nation, and it's certainly not good for our continental economy, where that is so very integrated. And so if there is a pathway where the tariffs have been put on pause by the placement of military folks alongside the Mexican border, I would hope there could be something similar that would be done on the Canadian border. At the end of the day, we can't have tariffs. It is just harmful to Canadians and North Americans.
Mm-hmm. And for people who don't know, there is that promise by Mexico to send 10,000 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to help address migrant concerns, fentanyl concerns as well. But, you know, the federal government here in this country, it has already promised to increase and has started to increase border security. They've earmarked money for equipment like helicopters and drones. They've increased personnel with the help of the provinces along the U.S. border. Do you think the federal government has not responded with enough urgency to the security concerns raised by Donald Trump?
I think the $1.3 billion and the plan that federal government has put in place is positive. You've seen provinces augment or enhance that plan, us included, in really focusing in on that 30 to 50 kilometers near our border crossings. But here's an opportunity to do more. The goal is to not have tariffs. The goal is, yes, for us to not have fentanyl or illegal migrants in our communities in Canada or North America, for that matter. My suggestion a number of weeks ago was to bring the CBSA in under the military spend. It does two things: opens up the opportunity for military officers to help aid by the thousands at our border crossings, in our airports, and maybe even at our ports, cargo ports if needed. And two, our CBSA investment then would become 2% of our NATO commitment, or of our military spend, which would allow us to get closer to that 2% NATO commitment that we have. And so I think, I had suggested this a number of weeks ago, and it's my hope that the federal government would reconsider, and I've suggested it again to Minister LeBlanc this morning.
Mm-hmm. Now, this afternoon, Donald Trump, while he was signing some papers in the Oval Office, he talked about having a positive conversation with the Prime Minister today. He also talked about his criticism that Canada is not allowing enough U.S. agricultural products into Canada, and that Canada does not allow enough U.S. banks to do more work in this country. How do you think Ottawa should be responding to these two new issues, and in many ways not new because they've been raised before, but reiterated by Donald Trump today?
Well, I suspect the agricultural issue has to do with supply management, and that is going to be an ongoing discussion in Canada and in the U.S. By whether it be our federal governments, likely our federal governments. And with respect to the banking, I mean, we are an integrated economy across the border, and there's how we are creating wealth and creating jobs, and creating, what I say is continental energy and food security. But in doing so, through that integration, we're actually creating our own general security as well on a continental basis. And so, all of these are fair for discussion. Our largest trading partner is raising them as concerns. We should, I'm not saying do exactly as he wishes, but be open to those discussions and engage on the topics that are important to our largest trading partner. At the end of the day, that's important to us, and the relationship is part of how we create wealth in our Canadian communities.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, this external threat of American tariffs, it does raise once again Canada's own failure to achieve interprovincial free trade. Why has that been so hard to achieve? Because it has been discussed, as you know, for a good 30 years at the least here.
Two reasons. There's still some protections among the provinces. There's exemptions in the CFTA agreement. We're encouraging provinces to lift all or virtually all of the exemptions that they might have, and the federal government has the most, and so they have a role to play in that as well. So that's the first. Second reason, we have had a very a lack of resolve to have a very serious conversation across this nation about how we get our products to ports so that we are not reliant specifically on the U.S. That comes in the conversations we have about rail operation and rail efficiencies, port operation, port efficiencies, and I would say most notably pipelines. And we need to have a very different, much more mature conversation around how we are transporting products to one another as Canadians. Yes, how we're transporting them to traditionally allied partners like Americans and even Mexico, but how we are building that infrastructure and approving that infrastructure to get the products that are creating wealth for Canadian families to port positions so that we can literally sell them to anyone in the world if necessary.
Mm-hmm. So you use the word resolve. You've sat through so many meetings of the First Ministers now since Donald Trump made his tariff threat. So I'm wondering, Premier, has that resolve been increased now? Is there a greater urgency, and will we see free trade across the provinces soon, do you think?
It has increased, and it needs to stick and it needs to be ongoing. The resolve to build a pipeline, for example, from Alberta to anywhere in Canada, that needs to be an option. The resolve and the commitment of all Canadians to build a pipeline from Alberta, Saskatchewan, to any port position in Canada also needs to be a commitment that Canadians make. The same goes for rail. The same goes for the operations of rail pipelines as well as our port positions. And in addition to that, we need to approach the exemptions or the carve-outs that each province has in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement with the effort to removing those. Saskatchewan is. It's our hope that we'll be able to remove all or virtually all of the 7 or 8 exemptions that we have. We would ask other provinces to do the same. And the federal government, who has the most exemptions in the Canada Free Trade Agreement, needs to come to the table with a commitment to remove their exemptions as well.
Premier Scott Moe, thank you for this. Appreciate the time tonight.
Thank you, Michael. You have a wonderful afternoon.
And you.